Hey y'all, it's entry number 16 of this offseason series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Lamar Jackson, quarterback, Baltimore Ravens. The positives with Lamar Jackson. To start, we have to talk about his historic rushing upside. Lamar Jackson became the first quarterback in NFL history to have two 1,000 or more rushing yard seasons after the 2020 NFL season. In just 12 games during the 2021 season, he had 133 carries for 767 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Over the course of 58 career games played in the NFL, he's averaged 10.6 carries, 63.3 rushing yards, and 0.36 rushing touchdowns per game. He's in a whole different stratosphere from other quarterbacks in terms of rushing upside, which gives him a massive fantasy ceiling. Strong fantasy production as a starting quarterback. Lamar Jackson averaged 28.1 fantasy points per game in 2019, 22.8 fantasy points per game in 2020, and 21.1 fantasy points per game in 2021, and was the QB1 in 2019, QB10 in 2020, and QB15 in 2021 in total fantasy points. His fantasy point totals over the last 3 years are 421.7, 341.7, and 253.0. He's averaged at least 20 fantasy points per game in each of the last 3 seasons, which shows that he isn't just a one-season wonder, and he has the highest fantasy peak of any active NFL quarterback with his incredible 2019 season where he averaged 28.1 fantasy points per game. Clearly, he's an elite fantasy quarterback. Moving on to the concerns with Lamar Jackson. To start, we have to talk about his fumbles. When a quarterback runs as much as Lamar does, there's a good chance that they have more fumbles than the average quarterback. Lamar Jackson had 12 fumbles in 2018, 9 fumbles in 2019, 10 fumbles in 2020, and 6 fumbles in 2021. He has 37 total fumbles in his regular season career, of 58 games and 49 starts. You're likely seeing about 10 fumbles again from Lamar in 2022 if he plays all 17 games. Marquise Brown is gone. The Baltimore Ravens traded away one of their top pass catchers from the 2021 season in Marquise Brown. During the 2021 NFL season, Brown had 91 receptions on 146 targets for 1,008 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. Losing one of his better weapons may hurt Lamar Jackson's fantasy value a bit. Some additional thoughts on Lamar Jackson. During the 2021 season, Lamar Jackson had 1 out of 12 games with 0 to 5 fantasy points, 1 out of 12 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 1 out of 12 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, 5 out of 12 games with 15 to 20 fantasy points, 1 out of 12 games with 20 to 25 fantasy points, and 3 out of 12 games with over 30 fantasy points according to fantasy data. Lamar Jackson averaged 17.24 rushing attempts, 108.74 rushing yards, and 1.31 rushing touchdowns per game during his 38-game college career at Louisville. Will left tackle Ronnie Stanley be healthy by the start of the 2022 season? He's been one of the better offensive linemen in the league, but has played just 380 snaps since 2019, according to Pro Football Focus. Personal opinion: Lamar Jackson is currently going off the board as QB4, about pick 54 overall on ESPN, and QB4, about pick 45 overall on Yahoo. I don't usually like reaching for a quarterback, but Lamar might be the exception for me at his current ADP. His rushing upside gives him the highest ceiling among all fantasy quarterbacks. I mean, for goodness sake, he averaged 28.1 fantasy points per game in 2019. He's averaged at least 21 fantasy points per game in each of the last 3 seasons, so the floor is there too. Jackson's clearly in that elite tier of fantasy quarterbacks for me, and since he's got the most reasonable draft price of the big four quarterbacks, right now, he'll probably be the most popular draft target for me of those elite quarterbacks. I have him ranked as QB3 right below Josh Allen and Justin Herbert in 2022. Charitable Cause. For each of these entries, we will highlight a charitable cause or organization. Lamar Jackson has previously donated to the Louisville chapter of Blessings in a Backpack. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you have a player that you'd like to see covered in the video format of the A Player a Day series, drop a comment below.